Thousands of years ago, a civilization thrived. Vast cities glittering under the blazing sun, streets so precisely designed, they'd put modern planners to shame. But beneath that perfection lay something far darker. Because when archaeologists finally uncovered the ruins of the Indus Valley, they found something horrifying. Millions of lives erased, and not a single woman's story left behind. Not one. No names, no letters, no carvings of their faces. It was as if every woman who ever lived there, every mother, daughter, lover, or leader, had been deliberately silenced by time itself. Here's the chilling part. We've uncovered more than 1,500 settlements from the Indus Valley, stretching from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. We've found toys, jewelry, tools, even ancient plumbing systems. But when it comes to the women, the people who carried its lifeblood, its culture, its generations, history goes mute. Imagine this. You're walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-daro. The sun burns above, wind sweeping through broken streets that once echoed with laughter. You find clay bangles scattered near a buried skeleton, delicate, fragile, beautiful. And then it hits you. This was someone's life. A woman's. A woman who lived, worked, dreamed, and died here. And yet we don't even know her name. The Indus Valley was no small civilization. Around 2600 BCE, it rivaled Mesopotamia and Egypt. Its cities pulsed with trade, art, and architecture, far ahead of its time. But unlike those civilizations, there are no grand tombs, no kings, no queens, just silence. A silence that hides an entire gender, an entire world of women erased from the record. Archaeologists have found thousands of tiny female figurines, wide hips, jeweled necks, serene faces. Some call them goddesses, others, fertility idols. But maybe, just maybe, they were portraits, not of deities, but of real women turned into myths, because history refused to remember them as human. Each figurine, each bead, each strand of terracotta jewelry is a whisper from the past, a whisper of lives lived in the shadows. Were these women farmers, merchants, midwives, leaders? Were they free, or were they owned? No one knows, because the Indus people left behind no written words we can read. Their script, carved in stone, still defies translation, a locked voice crying from 4,000 years ago. And that's the tragedy that chills the soul. The Indus Valley wasn't destroyed by war or famine alone. It was destroyed by time, and with it, the memory of millions of women who built it. Somewhere beneath the sands of Pakistan and India lie their stories, buried beneath walls, hidden in clay, waiting for someone to listen. And that's where we begin. The rise of a civilization, so advanced it astonished the world, yet so secretive it forgot to remember its own daughters. Imagine this. It's 2500 BCE. The sun rises over Mohenjo-daro, one of the greatest cities the ancient world ever saw. From above, it looks almost unreal. Streets perfectly aligned in a grid, houses equipped with bathrooms and running water, a drainage system that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. While most of the world still lived in scattered tribes, this civilization had already mastered urban planning. But as you walk through its quiet ruins today, you'll feel it, an eerie silence, because for all its brilliance, the city tells us almost nothing about its people, and even less about its women. Think about that for a sec. A civilization that could design perfect streets, that built multi-storied homes with private wells and bathing rooms, somehow left behind no written stories of the people who lived there. No poems, no diaries, no monuments to queens or mothers. It's as if the women of the Indus were ghosts, present in every corner of society, yet invisible in history's mirror. Here's the haunting truth. Everything we know about Indus women comes from fragments, figurines, bangles, a handful of burial sites, but there's no text, no scroll, no myth passed down through generations. The script of the Indus remains undeciphered, leaving us with questions that cut deeper than any excavation could answer. Who was she, the woman who crafted the first bead necklace found in Harappa? Did she sit by a river, stringing tiny stones under the morning sun, her fingers stained with color and clay? Did she sell them in the bustling marketplace, surrounded by traders shouting in a language now lost to time? We may never know, but we can feel her presence. Archaeologists found evidence of trade between the Indus and distant Mesopotamia. Their seals, tiny, detailed stamps, were discovered thousands of miles away in Iraq. But while men's roles as merchants and craftsmen are often assumed, could women have been traders too? Many historians now believe so. The jewelry, the cosmetics, the artistry, these were not just symbols of wealth, they were industries. And behind every industry, there are hands. Skilled, patient, creative, possibly female, and yet their faces remain missing. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley left no grand statues of rulers, no carvings of women in royal robes or divine glory. That absence speaks volumes. It suggests a society where the individual, even the powerful, was secondary to the collective, where identity was buried beneath uniformity. But here's where it becomes even more mysterious. Some scholars believe the Indus Valley may have practiced a kind of gender balance unseen in other ancient societies. They point to the abundance of female figurines and the lack of evidence for kings or male rulers. Could it be that women once held sacred roles here, as priestesses, healers, or leaders, their power later erased as history shifted toward patriarchy? If that's true, then what we've lost isn't just a story, it's a legacy of balance, a world where women may have once been central to religion, economy. Picture the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, that vast, mysterious structure at the city's heart. Was it a place of ritual cleansing, a temple, or maybe a sacred space where women gathered to pray, to heal, to connect? The truth is buried in the silence. The more we uncover about this civilization, the clearer one thing becomes. The Indus didn't just build cities, they built systems of life. Systems where women's presence was vital, yet hidden behind the walls of anonymity. And somewhere between those walls, and that silence, lies the most painful question of all. How does a civilization so advanced forget to remember its women? In a world where every written word has vanished, clay became the last witness, and through it, the women of the Indus Valley still whisper, faintly but unmistakably. Archaeologists call them terracotta figurines, but that term feels too sterile for what they truly are. Small, delicate statues, molded by ancient hands. Women with wide hips, ornate headdresses, and jewelry that glimmers even under millennia of dust. To some, they're fertility idols. To others, but look close enough, and you'll see something deeper. A desperate attempt to preserve womanhood in a world that left no words behind. Imagine this, an artisan, 4,500 years ago, pressing her thumb into soft clay. She shapes a face, smooths the curves, carves a necklace, and bakes it in fire. She doesn't know that this tiny figure will outlast her city, her people, her language. Maybe she was creating a goddess. Or maybe she was sculpting herself, a silent portrait, in a world that never wrote her name. These figurines are everywhere, in homes, temples, burial sites, each one slightly different. Some with flowers in their hair, others with bold eyes and commanding stances. Could these variations represent individual women, mothers, leaders, artisans, rather than a single divine symbol? Could it be that the Indus people honored womanhood itself, even as time erased their individual identities? Then there are the Bengal. In Harappa, entire workshops dedicated to shell and terracotta jewelry have been unearthed. An ancient fashion industry thousands of years before the word fashion existed. Piles of unfinished bracelets, broken molds, colored powders, clear signs that crafting beauty was a way of life. Who made them? Who wore them? Some scholars believe women worked in these workshops, shaping ornaments for trade and ceremony. If that's true, then the women of the Indus were not passive symbols. They were creators, artists, and economic contributors. And yet, the tragedy remains. We only know them through objects. No songs, no story, no faces. Only fragments that survived by accident. Burials tell us more. In several Indus graves, archaeologists have found women laid to rest with care, surrounded by jewelry, beads, combs, and even mirrors made of bronze. These weren't cheap trinkets. They were symbols of respect, perhaps even love. It suggests these women weren't ignored in life. They were cherished, at least by those closest to them. But history, cold and distant, forgot them all the same. And then there's the seal, one of the most mysterious artifacts ever discovered, a tiny square, carved with symbols no one can read, often showing women beside sacred animals or mystical trees. Was this religious art or a glimpse into a matriarchal belief system, where women stood as guardians of fertility and life itself? The truth is, we're looking at an entire civilization through the cracks of its ruin. The Indus script, still undeciphered, could hold the answers to everything, their beliefs, their customs, their view of women. But until someone finally cracks that ancient code, these figurines, bangles, and seals remain the only language we have left. Each one is a message, a cry from the past, saying, "We were here." And that's the heartbreaking beauty of it all. A civilization that vanished without war, without destruction, still speaks through clay, through stone, through the fragile remnants of women who refuse to disappear completely. Their voices might be faint, but they survived 4,000 years of silence. And if we listen closely enough, maybe we can still hear them. Here's where the story takes a sharp, unsettling turn, because no one truly knows what role women played in the Indus Valley civilization. Their silence has fueled endless debates, and historians are split between two radically different worlds. One sees them as powerful figures, priestesses, traders, and matriarchs. The other sees them as prisoners of a system that worshiped their fertility but silenced their freedom. Let's start with the hopeful theory, the one that paints the Indus world as progressive, even revolutionary for its time. Some scholars argue that the abundance of female figurines, the central role of fertility symbols, and the absence of kings or warrior monuments all hint at a matriarchal society, one where women held sacred authority. They point to seals showing women standing before sacred trees or animals, perhaps performing rituals. Could they have been priestesses, spiritual leaders guiding the moral and agricultural rhythms of their people? Imagine that, 4,000 years ago, women not as property, but as power, not hidden in homes, but leading ceremonies, making trade decisions, controlling resources. It's not impossible. In a civilization where peace and balance seem to define daily life, no evidence of major wars, no palaces, no armies, it makes sense that harmony might have been reflected in gender relations too. The Indus people might have revered the feminine principle, seeing women not as subjects, but as the embodiment of creation itself. But then comes the darker side, the theory that shatters this hopeful image. Others believe these women were never free, that the figurines we see weren't symbols of power, but of control. Idols built by men to idealize what women should be: fertile, obedient, silent. In this version, women were the beating heart of the home, but invisible in every other space. If you look closely at the artifacts, this argument starts to sting with truth. The female figurines, for instance, they're all similar: youthful, beautiful, pregnant. None show women aging, working, or leading. They're not people, they're icons, a civilization's ideal, carved in clay. Even the jewelry and cosmetics, so often interpreted as symbols of empowerment, could be evidence of expectation. Perhaps women were expected to adorn themselves, not as a form of expression, but as duty. Their beauty, like their bodies, belonged to the system. And then, there's the question of labor. Excavations show that some women were buried near tools, pestles, pottery fragments, weaving equipment. Did that mean they were artisans? Or workers bound to domestic life, while men handled trade and politics? The evidence can argue both ways, depending on who's reading it. That's what makes the Indus women so haunting. They exist in this eternal gray zone, between reverence and restraint, worshipped in theory, forgotten in reality. One historian once said, the Indus women are like shadows, always visible, never graspable. Then it's true. Every discovery deepens the mystery instead of solving it. Maybe that's the cruel beauty of their story. These women were both everything and nothing, sacred yet invisible, powerful yet powerless. And as time marched on, when the rivers began to dry and cities started to crumble, their fate grew even darker. Because when a civilization collapses, it's always the women who pay the highest price. No civilization falls in a single night. It fades, slowly, painfully, like a flame running out of air. For the Indus Valley, that ending came not through war or conquest, but through something more merciless, the earth itself turning against them. Around 1900 BCE, the mighty Saraswati River, the lifeline of the Indus world, began to dry. The monsoons weakened, crops failed, cities that once buzzed with life turned silent. Brick by brick, street by street, a civilization that had stood for over 1,000 years began to crumble. And as the cities died, the women vanished completely. History always remembers kings and conquerors. But in collapse, it's the nameless who suffer first. The women of the Indus Valley, once surrounded by order, beauty, and trade, were left to face hunger, displacement, and fear. Their children starved, their homes turned to dust, their rituals forgotten. Imagine the scene. A mother in Harappa, clutching her child as the wells ran dry. Her bangles cracked from heat, her voice hoarse from calling for water that would never come. In her final days, she probably didn't know her world was ending. Only that the river, once the rhythm of her life, had abandoned her. And she wasn't alone. Across the plains, thousands of families fled their cities in search of food and water. The roads that once led to bustling trade routes now carried desperate refugees. Some found new lands. Others didn't survive the journey. Archaeological evidence tells us that many settlements were simply abandoned, left untouched, like time capsules sealed in despair. But what those ruins don't show is the emotional devastation, the fear, the loss, the silence that replaced laughter in the courtyards and songs in the streets. When civilizations fall, men lose power, but women lose identity. The women of the Indus had no temples carved in their names, no monuments to protect their memory. When the last fires of Mohenjo-daro went cold, their stories burned with them. Generations of strength, art, and motherhood, gone. Forgotten, not because they didn't matter, but because history didn't think they did. And that's what makes this tragedy so haunting. Egypt had Cleopatra, Mesopotamia had Inanna, Greece had Helen. But the Indus had millions of women whose faces we'll never see, whose names we'll never speak. All that's left are fragments, a broken mirror here, a painted pot there, remnants of a world that once pulsed with life. Yet, in their silence, there's something almost defiant, because the ruins still stand. The streets are still visible, the artifacts still survive, and every one of them is proof that they were here. They lived, loved, created, endured. Their civilization might have fallen, but their presence lingers, not in words but in the earth itself. So when you stand before the ruins of Mohenjo-daro and the wind brushes across your face, remember that's not just the wind, that's the breath of the forgotten, the whispers of women who built one of humanity's first cities and watched it vanish beneath the dust. But even in their silence, they left us a message, that no matter how deeply history buries the truth, memory has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. We live in a world obsessed with progress, skyscrapers, AI, and endless information. Yet beneath all that noise, the same truth remains. Civilizations are only as strong as how they treat their women. And that's why the story of the Indus Valley women isn't ancient history. It's a mirror. Think about it. 4,000 years ago, these women helped build one of the most advanced societies on Earth, with clean water, planned cities, and trade networks stretching across continents. They worked, they created, they birthed generations that shaped early humanity. But when the story of that civilization was written, their voices were erased. Sound familiar? Even today, women's roles in history are often edited, softened, or ignored. We praise empires for their architecture, but rarely for the women who kept them alive. We talk about kings, never the mothers who raised them. We study wars, not the wives who rebuilt after them. The silence that began in the Indus Valley has echoed for millennia, but that silence can be broken if we choose to listen. Every artifact, every figurine, every trace buried beneath the soil is a plea from the past. See us. Remember us. They're not just relics. They're reminders that civilizations don't thrive on stone and trade alone. They thrive on empathy, equality, and shared purpose. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Indus women. Despite being forgotten by history, they still shaped it. Their labor built the foundations of cities that continue to astonish archaeologists. Their artistry, the pottery, jewelry, and intricate seals continues to inspire modern design. Their endurance reminds us that silence doesn't mean weakness. The tragedy of their disappearance is not just about loss, it's about opportunity. Because every time we tell their story, we restore a fragment of what the world took away. Imagine if we started honoring the unseen hands of history, the women who wove, built, led, and loved, as much as we honor the men who conquered and ruled. How different would our understanding of humanity be? The women of the Indus Valley may have been buried beneath sand and time, but their spirit endures. In every woman who fights to be heard, every artist who creates without recognition, every mother who keeps going when the world forgets her worth. So the next time you hear about Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, don't just think of bricks and ruins. Think of the women who once stood there, laughing, working, dreaming, unaware that their lives would become mysteries. Because they weren't just part of history, they were history. And the least we can do is remember them. If the story moved you, don't let it fade, like the voices of the women who built the Indus Valley. Share this video so their names echo again after 4,000 years. Subscribe if you believe forgotten history deserves to be told, not buried. And let's build a world that remembers its women, not as shadows and ruins, but as the foundation of every civilization that ever lived. Because their silence was forced, but their story, that's ours to tell.